Little black boy told the judge. I'm my mom's lawyer. Then something unbelievable happened. The boy stood on tiptoe, his small hands gripping the edge of the wooden table, eyes barely level with the judge's gaze. The courtroom was silent. Every creak of the benches, every breath of the spectators pressing down on him like a weight too heavy for his shoulders. His voice trembled, but it carried something no one expected, conviction. I'm my mom's lawyer, he said. The room shifted. Some scoffed, others gasped. A child, dark-skinned, barely 12, daring to stand where seasoned men in polished suits had failed. His mother's wrists were bound in cold steel just feet away, her eyes wet but burning with pride. What kind of world forces a child to become a shield, a sword, a voice for justice? What story lies behind this impossible moment? And here's the question you need to ask yourself. If a boy has to fight the system with nothing but his courage, what does that say about the system itself? Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. Before that courtroom ever held its breath, before a boy declared himself his mother's lawyer, there was just Jamal, a 12-year-old kid with scraped knees, boundless curiosity, and a laugh that carried to the cracked hallways of a rundown apartment block. Every morning began with the same routine. The whine of buses outside the window, the smell of fried eggs from a neighbor's kitchen, his mother's soft hum of an old gospel tune as she braided her hair in the bathroom mirror, getting ready for yet another grueling shift. Jamal would sit at the wobbly kitchen table, bent over his notebook, scribbling drawings of superheroes with capes far too big for their bodies. His mom always said, "Baby, one day you won't just draw heroes. You'll be one." Their world was small but full of texture. The corner store owner who always slipped him an extra piece of candy. The church ladies who hugged him too tight, leaving the scent of lavender powder on his clothes. The sounds of kids playing basketball on cracked concrete courts, sneakers squeaking, laughter bouncing off graffiti-stained walls. But beneath that rhythm of ordinary life, shadows lurked. Jamal noticed them, even if no one talked about them. The way his mom's shoulders stiffened when she saw police cruisers crawling through their street. The way landlords ignored broken heaters in winter, but showed up instantly when rent was late. The way store clerks followed him when he lingered too long in the candy aisle. Little cracks in the world. Hairline fractures in the foundation of his childhood. Still, Jamal dreamed big. He devoured books, especially the old law textbooks his mother picked up from thrift shops. Their spines were worn, pages marked with other people's notes. But Jamal read them anyway, mouthing words like justice and rights as if they were spells he could learn to cast. He imagined himself standing tall, commanding a room, protecting his mom from every unfair hand life tried to deal her. His mother, Denise, was the anchor of his world. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses in the morning, waiting tables at night, and still somehow found time to sit with Jamal before bed, her voice soft as she whispered, "Don't let this world tell you what you can't be." But no amount of whispers or dreams could completely shield them. In their neighborhood, opportunity felt like a locked door with no key. And one night, when Denise came home with fear in her eyes and bruises on her wrists from something she didn't yet explain, Jamal realized the cracks around them weren't just spreading. They were splitting wide open. It began with whispers. The kind of whispers that cling to walls, slither through doorways, and poison the air long before truth has a chance to breathe. Denise had been accused of something unthinkable. Theft. A white woman in one of the homes she cleaned claimed her wedding ring had vanished, and suddenly every eye turned toward Denise. No one asked why a woman working double shifts just to keep her lights on would risk everything for a piece of jewelry. No one asked, because they already thought they knew the answer. Jamal noticed a shift immediately. The corner store clerk, who once slipped him candy, now barely met his gaze. The landlord who ignored repairs showed up unannounced, his tone sharp, like Jamal and his mother were already guilty of something. And when police came knocking, heavy fists pounding on their thin door at midnight, Jamal watched his mother's hands tremble as she tried to explain, voice breaking but polite, because she knew too well what could happen if she didn't. "Ma'am, just come with us for some questions," they said, though their grip on her arms told another story. Jamal clung to her side, shouting she didn't do anything. But the officers didn't bend down to meet his eyes. They didn't even look at him. To them, he was invisible. That night burned into him like a scar. The flashing red and blue lights outside the apartment, neighbors peeking through blinds, some shaking their heads, others whispering, "I knew it." His mother being pushed into the back of the squad car, lips pressed tight, as if silence might keep her dignity intact. Jamal was left in the doorway, heart pounding, powerless. At school the next day, the rumors had already spread. Kids snickered. Some called him thief's son. Teachers gave him that look, pity mixed with suspicion, the kind that said, "We don't expect much from you anyway." For the first time, Jamal felt the walls of his world closing in. The safe corners of his childhood, the basketball courts, the church pews, the warm smell of his mother's cooking. All of it felt tainted by an invisible stain he couldn't wash away. And deep inside, something began to shift. Fear, yes, but also a spark. The same spark that made him underline the word justice in those old books late at night. Because if no one else would offend his mother, then maybe, somehow, he would. The days after Denise's arrest unfolded like a nightmare that refused to end. At first, Jamal thought it would be simple. A mistake, a misunderstanding. Someone would realize the truth, and his mother would be back home, humming her gospel tunes, kissing his forehead before bed. But reality was not that merciful. Denise was held without bail. The charge was serious. Felony theft. The missing ring, worth thousands, had vanished during her shift. The employer swore she'd seen Denise acting suspicious. That word, slippery, undefined, yet heavy with accusation, was enough to tighten the noose around her. Jamal sat through the first hearing, his small body sinking into the wooden bench, dwarfed by the towering walls of the courthouse. Lawyers in press suits shuffled papers, spoke in clipped tones, tossed around words like evidence and testimony, as if they were sharp stones meant to wound. Jamal's eyes kept darting to his mother, shackled, tired, but standing tall. She caught his gaze, forced a smile. That smile was the only thing holding him together. But what tore him apart was this. Denise didn't have a lawyer. She couldn't afford one. The court appointed a man who showed up late, smelled faintly of whiskey, and spoke to her like she was already guilty. When Jamal tugged at his sleeve, begging, "Please help my mom," the man sighed and muttered, "Kid, that's not how this works." That was the first time Jamal felt rage coil inside him like a living thing. At home, the apartment felt hollow. Her voice was gone. Her presence was gone. Bills piled up. The landlord threatened eviction. Jamal, 12 years old, found himself cooking ramen for dinner, folding clothes that still smelled faintly of his mother's perfume, and stared at the empty chair across from him at the table. But every night, after finishing his homework, he pulled out the law books. He read until his eyelids sagged, tracing words with his finger, whispering definitions to himself. Burden of proof, reasonable doubt, presumption of innocence. He didn't always understand, but he held on to them like weapons, polishing them in secret. The neighborhood wasn't kind. Some neighbors avoided him, afraid his mother's shame might rub off. Others leaned in close, whispering gossip like poison. Jamal's best friend Malik tried to stick by him, but even Malik's parents warned, "Don't get too involved." At school, teachers began treating Jamal differently. He was kept after class for small mistakes, his assignment scrutinized more harshly than others. One afternoon, when Jamal tried to defend himself against a false accusation cheating, a teacher said softly, "Like mother, like son." The words hit harder than any slap could. He went home that day, fists clenched, tears burning hot, and for the first time, he whispered aloud in his empty apartment, "I'll be her lawyer." It sounded ridiculous. A boy barely taller than the judge's bench? But the more he said it, the more it stopped being a dream and started becoming a vow. Weeks passed. Each court date was a fresh wound. The prosecutor painted Denise as a desperate woman who stole to escape poverty. No real evidence, just circumstance and prejudice wrapped in polished language. The court-appointed lawyer barely spoke. Jamal watched, powerless but burning, as his mother's fate seemed to slip further and further from her hands. Then came the moment that changed everything. One night, Jamal snuck into his mother's closet. He found an old box beneath her clothes. Inside, a collection of receipts, pay stubs, and a small notebook where Denise had meticulously written every house she cleaned, every hour, every payment. Proof. Proof she had been working at another house on the very day the ring went missing. Jamal clutched that notebook like it was a holy book. His chest heaved. Here it was, the truth. But Wade tried to hand it to the court-appointed lawyer the next morning. The man barely glanced at it before tossing it back. This won't help. The jury won't care about some scribbles in a notebook. Something snapped in Jamal that day. If no one else would care, then he would make them. The boy began preparing. At school, instead of doodling superheroes, he wrote opening statements in the margins of his notebooks. At home, he stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, practicing arguments, his voice shaking, then steadier, then strong. He scribbled down questions for the witnesses. He read about rights, cross-examination, evidence. His heart pounded, his palms sweated, but with every practice, he grew taller in his mind. And then the unthinkable, the day of the trial arrived. Denise's lawyer failed to show. Whether from negligence, indifference, or corruption, Jamal never knew. But as the judge cleared his throat and the prosecutor shuffled papers, Jamal felt something take hold of him. Fear and courage fused together into something unstoppable. He stood. His voice cracked at first, but it carried across the silent courtroom. "Your Honor, I'll represent my mom." Gasps rippled through the room. The judge raised his brows, incredulous. Lawyers smirked. The prosecutor laughed under his breath. But Jamal's mother, her eyes widened and softened, tears glistening. For the first time since the nightmare began, she looked not just afraid, but proud. And in that moment, Jamal knew there was no turning back. The boy had become the lawyer. The courtroom air was heavy, thick with a silence that pressed down on every chest. The judge peered over his glasses, his tone incredulous. "Son, this is not a game. You can't just stand in for an attorney." But Jamal didn't flinch. His knees trembled, his hands shook against the polished wood, but his voice, thin, breaking, yet steady with conviction, rose above the room. "My mom doesn't have anyone else. She deserves someone to fight for her. If nobody will, I will." Laughter rippled across the prosecutor's table. A smirk curled across his lips. "Your Honor, this is absurd. The boy doesn't know the law. This is a waste of the court's time." But the judge, for reasons even he might not have understood, leaned back. Perhaps it was a fire in Jamal's eyes. Perhaps the failure of a system that had left a woman defenseless. After a long pause, he said slowly, "I'll allow him to speak, but proceed carefully." And suddenly, the room that dismissed Jamal seconds ago now leaned in. He walked to the center, small footsteps echoing far louder than they should have. He clutched the worn notebook, his mother's notebook, like a sword. His voice cracked at first. "Ladies and gentlemen, my mom is not a thief. She's the hardest working person I know. She cleans houses every day, sometimes until her hands bleed, just so I can eat, just so I can go to school. She doesn't steal. She survives." The jury shifted. Some avoided his gaze. Others softened. Jamal pressed on, flipping open the notebook. On the day that ring went missing, she wasn't even there. She was working for another family. "Here, look, every hour, every address, every penny." She wrote it all down. The prosecutor snapped, "That's hearsay. That's not admissible." But Jamal turned, his voice sharp now, surprising even himself. "It's not hearsay. It's the truth. And if nobody else will say it, I will, because it matters." His hands trembled. Sweat stung his eyes. His chest burned with every breath. For a moment, the room spun. Too bright, too loud, the scrape of pens, the coughs, the rustle of papers crashing in his ears. Fear clawed at him, whispering, "You're just a kid. Sit down before they laugh again." But then he looked at his mother, her wrists still in chains, her back still straight. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but her chin lifted, as if she were holding him up with invisible hands. And Jamal's fear broke. He took a step closer to the jury box, his voice clearer now, stronger, You don't know what it's like to come home every night and see your mom's hands shaking from scrubbing someone else's floor. You don't know what it's like to watch her smile through tears, just so you don't feel the weight she carries. And now you want to take her away for something she didn't even do? No, I won't let you. Every word sliced through the room. Some jurors blinked rapidly, shifting uncomfortably. The prosecutor's smirk had faded. Even the judge leaned forward, elbows on the bench. Jamal raised a notebook high. This is proof. It may not look like much to you, just ink on paper. But to us, it's everything. It's her life, her honesty, her truth. And I need you to see her the way I do. Not as some poor woman they can blame, because it's easy, but as my mother, as innocent. The silence afterward was suffocating. Jamal's chest heaved, his eyes burned, his small frame trembling under the enormity of the moment. But he stood there unyielding, daring them to dismiss him. And in that silence, something shifted. A juror cleared her throat. Another exchanged a glance. Even the judge's eyes softened with a weight Jamal couldn't name. For the first time, it wasn't just a boy shouting into a void. It was truth breaking through cracks too long ignored. And as Jamal slowly lowered the notebook, his voice came one last time. Small, quiet, but powerful enough echo. My mom deserves justice, and I'm not leaving until she gets it. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity. Jamal sat beside his mother, her cuffed hands resting gently over his small ones. He could feel the tremor in her touch, could see the hope she was too afraid to speak aloud. The prosecutor shuffled his notes impatiently. The judge leaned back, and the courtroom waited. Finally, the foreperson stood. We find defendant, a pause, heavy as stone. Not guilty. The words cracked the air like thunder. Denise gasped, her shoulders collapsing under the release of a weight she had carried for weeks. Tears streaked her cheeks as the guard unlocked the shackles. She pulled Jamal into her arms, clutching him as though letting go would mean losing him again. For Jamal, it wasn't triumph he felt. It was relief, raw and overwhelming. His body shook, not with victory, but with exhaustion. He had stood where no child should ever have to, and though he had saved his mother, the scars of the battle would remain. But the story didn't end in that courtroom. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed, microphones shoved into their faces. How does it feel to be free? They asked Denise. How does it feel to defend your mother? They asked Jamal. He shrank back, gripping her hand tighter, wishing the world would give them space to breathe. Yet whispers spread. About the boy who stood up in court, about the system that almost swallowed his mother whole. Some praised his courage. Others muttered about a mockery of the law. But beneath all the noise lay one undeniable truth. The case should never have reached this point, because Denise's innocence wasn't a miracle found in her son's words. It had always been there, buried under layers of prejudice, neglect, and systemic failure. If the lawyer had cared, if the system had been just, if people had believed her humanity mattered, Jamal would never have had to stand on tiptoe to shout for justice. In the weeks that followed, life didn't suddenly turn golden. Bills still came. The landlord still sneered. The stares in the neighborhood didn't all vanish. But something inside Jamal and his mother had changed. She walked a little taller, holding her son's hand with new pride. He, in turn, carried himself with a quiet knowledge that his voice could cut through silence, that truth could live in even the smallest of bodies. And yet, beneath their private relief, a haunting question remained. How many others never get this chance? How many mothers sit in cells with no one to fight for them? How many children never see their parents come home? Because Jamal's story, remarkable as it was, should never have been needed. He should have been on a basketball court, or buried in a book, or simply living the unbroken childhood he deserved. Instead, he became a lawyer before he became a teenager. And so, his words linger, not just in that courtroom, but in the conscience of everyone who heard them. My mom deserves justice. If a 12-year-old boy can see that clearly, why can't a system built on laws and fairness? This isn't just their story. It's a mirror held up to us, a reminder of the cracks in our foundations, of the children forced to grow up too soon, of the women crushed under suspicion before evidence. So, If this unsettled you, good. It should. Let that discomfort push you to look closer. Ask harder questions. Demand better. Because awareness is a first step toward change. And Jamal's voice, thin, trembling, but unstoppable, should remind us all, silence is never an option when justice is at stake.